All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Balance, the podcast that attempts to examine controversial topics, current events, and pop culture phenomenon through the lenses of fairness, logic, and common sense. I'm Ben.
And I'm Steve.
And if this is your first time joining us, you should know up front that this is not a political podcast, although Steve tends to lean to the right, and I think I lean more to the left generally. This week, we're discussing the legalization of marijuana, and we are happy to have you with us.
All right. So I think first thing we need to do, we have to start with the big question here to to talk about this. So let's start with the question. And if you choose to divulge, Ben, have you ever used marijuana?
I sure have.
Okay. Do you want to expound upon that a little bit, or
it's interesting with me because when I was, a lot of people, I think their first experience with marijuana is when they're in their teens or early 20s, I would think. And I never, like all through high school and college, never tried it, never messed with it, never was really like that interested in it. It wasn't until I was much older, in my early 30s, that I went to art school, and pretty much everyone there was using it all the time.
Okay.
And then also, like now, I live in a state where it's legal, so it's
Sure.
it just seems much more prevalent in general.
Okay. But would you consider yourself a regular user?
No, definitely not. I mean, on occasion, but I'm pretty straight edge in that way. I don't drink at all, which is another thing. I just never, even when I was younger, I was never a drinker and have never been a drinker. And I mean, I use marijuana on occasion, but it's pretty spread out.
Is that something that you would do with your significant other present?
Yeah, I mean, on a Friday night or something, we're just hanging out.
So it's not taboo for that. Sometimes people say, well, I would, but I can't around certain people because, they're not into it or whatever. So, okay. So for that question for me, I'll say yes, definitely. And although I have to tell you, I'm not going to come across, I don't want to come across as a current subject matter expert, but I was definitely a subject matter expert when I was, I would say 17 through 19, meaning just before my 20th birthday. So about 3 years of steady, massive use of, marijuana, and when possible, hashish. If one guy was telling the truth one time, opium, to try it. And of course, this was back in the 80s.
So you've dabbled a little bit. Now, when you say opium, what, you're not talking about heroin?
No, like smoking. The
opium plant.
Yes. So, and again, this guy said, "Hey, this is what this is," and it definitely was a different thing than marijuana, than smoking weed and everything. But so yeah, I've smoked. There's times in my life I've smoked on a daily basis, or 2 or 3 times a day, and joints, bowls, mainly bongs, which is a water pipe. Never done the hookah experience, but to date that is, now 33 years ago. So I'm sure I can't speak to the current situation, but definitely a heavy user during that time in my life, in addition to other things. But
I'm kind of surprised to hear that, to be honest with you. I don't know what I was expecting. I guess the heavy use part is a little bit surprising.
yeah, well, with the person I am now, it doesn't seem really always to match, right? So I did a little research, and I'm going to run this down here, if you don't mind. So medical marijuana is legal in 36 states. It's legal in 4 out of 5, the 5 permanently inhabited territories. Don't ask me to name those off. And in Washington, D.C., that's medical. So you need a prescription. There's 18 states and Washington, D.C., the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam that have legalized marijuana. That includes the medical marijuana. You can get in those states marijuana on a prescription still, from a doctor. But those 18 states, DC, Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam, have legalized it. And there's 13 other states on top of that. And the U.S. Virgin Islands that have decriminalized its use.
I'm in one of those states.
Yeah. So do you know what that means, decriminalized? People think legalize and decriminalize. What's the difference? Well, that means it's reduced to civil penalties in those states. So they still say it's, not, it's sort of like speeding. They treat it like a minor traffic violation.
Yeah, write you a little ticket or something.
They'll write you a ticket. You either pay a fine or show up in court and,
in other words, it's not a criminal offense.
Yeah. So decriminalized, but not legalized. I'm assuming in those decriminalized states, I did not look this up, but they confiscate it or make you dump it out or something. But I don't know. They don't confiscate your car when you get pulled over for speeding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they just let you say, hey, here's a ticket, get out of here. So I don't know. I would imagine they'd probably make you dump it. But that's what decriminalized means. So 18 plus those couple of territories plus 13, basically you can smoke weed. So marijuana is still prohibited for any use under federal law. So that's basically the situation. So my question to you is there a difference? Should we have these different medical and recreational laws?
Well, okay. So at the root of this question is, I think this is something that will probably frame up this entire discussion. But my initial thought on this is, I don't see why you would have all that medical bureaucracy. It should just be legal the way that tobacco is. If you have ID, if you're over a certain age, you can buy it, it's taxed, and you carry on. I mean, especially in a society where alcohol is as prevalent as it is. I mean, I think alcohol is way more destructive, leads to way more volatile situations, and is essentially everywhere you go.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like to me, I just think, and the reason I even asked the question, because I think it seems ridiculous to make a difference. I understand there are some doctors who might say this specific person is having a specific problem, whether it be PTSD or something related to anxiety or something specific with long-term debilitating pain.
Sure.
that a doctor would say, hey, this is one of your options. But I don't think that, like they say to a big, huge fat person, one of your options is to stop eating so much. The other option is to start exercising, or maybe do both. You have options. It doesn't always probably would need a prescription, especially since you can get a prescription anyway. If you just go to the dispensary, talk to the doctor they have there, and they'll give you one if you just say, yeah, I have bad dreams every night, probably.
Yeah. Places that I've been where it's legal. So where I live in Illinois, I've been to Colorado, and when I was out in California, times that I have been to dispensaries in those states, that's pretty much what it seems to be. The people who work in those dispensaries know all about the different strains and what you need. You can kind of tell them what you're looking for, and they kind of advise you. So yeah, I don't see any need for a medical doctor to do that.
So now this brings something up though that I didn't think about till right now is, and I know I've run into this in my work experience. If there are people running marijuana dispensaries in states where marijuana is legal that are creating like fake LLCs under the name of another type of business so they can deposit their money in banks that are FDIC protected, because a marijuana dispensary can't, as long as that law or as long as the federal law says they can't. So therefore they're in violation of the federal law. Their money's not FDIC insured.
Oh, that's very interesting. And that's kind of did you do a deep dive on this, or how'd you come up with that?
It was something I did at work during an investigation I was involved in.
Oh, gotcha. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't even considered that, but actually that makes sense. And I'm thinking now that you say that I feel like I have seen some stories of dispensaries and other businesses that deal with this medical marijuana being targeted for robbery, because they're, I guess, known to have a lot of cash on hand. And that's probably related to what you're talking about. They can't just go to a bank and deposit it.
Sure. And there's suspicious activity reports that banks provide to the federal government. Like if people are depositing like large amounts of cash or any large amounts of money. And it's pretty easy to tell when you're looking at things like this, when people are playing around with it and things look suspicious. Are we encouraging people to try to cheat or to hide things or to be devious and mischievous because we've got legal in the state and illegal federally? So I'm thinking, like, are we even encouraging people to get organized crime to get involved and say, hey, we'll handle this problem for you?
It definitely seems like a misstep. I mean, if you have folks that are operating legitimate marijuana businesses and they can't put their money in the bank, that to me is indicative of there's a problem.
Yeah. Now that was a few years, like maybe 3 years ago that I was involved in that. But I know I mentioned it in a discussion with someone very recently, and they said, yeah, that still is a problem. That it's one of those problems, like there's no really good answer to, and no one's figured out what the answer is yet. So,
well, it seems like to me, and since you and I are attempting to come up with some logical answers here, the federal enforcement that is preventing these people from being able to put money in the bank should go away. I don't understand why that's still there.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're even really enforcing it, but the banks are like, hey, if it's Bob's marijuana dispensary, banks are like, I can't do that because I've got all my customers and I'm going to be in violation as Mr. Bank owner.
Seems overcomplicated.
Yeah, it's totally overcomplicated. But anyway, that's sort of a sidebar. That's another issue. But dealing specifically with legalization, on a federal level, there's some pros and there's some cons. Let's take the pros to it first, because I think they tend to be pretty obvious. The pros are it would be taxable. You already mentioned that, right? Like they tax cigarettes, we tax gasoline, we tax alcohol, so there's going to be revenue there, obviously. It would be big business. It would be shipped in on a truck. It would be legally stamped. It would be inspected. There would be standards. It would be taxed.
Another part of that is that it would be regulated. So yes, instead of buying it from some guy in front of his apartment building, you're buying it from a place and you know exactly what's in there and what strain it is and where it came from and how potent it is. And that's all guaranteed, and that information, there's a lot more transparency in general.
So I think the pros seem pretty strong. So, as far as the cons, people who are against it, because there are people against it. Do you know people who are against it?
Well, let me add one other pro, which I don't think you touched on, job creation.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. For sure.
I mean, there's a whole infrastructure that is to support these businesses. So someone's growing it. And it's legitimate.
And it goes deeper than most people think. People say someone will have to work at the store. Yeah, and someone's going to have to drive the truck that delivers it. Someone's going to have to do the inspections. Someone's going to, they need to build the places where it's sold. They need to build and maintain warehouses where it's kept.
Yeah, they have to design their websites and all that stuff.
Everything, tons of opportunity there. And it's if legalized, big business, this is going to be the hottest ticket investment.
No, you just said if it's legalized, but I mean, I think.
Well, it is if it's federally legalized, though, in those states that.
You're saying if the federal criminalization goes away, there'll be,
In those states, though, I mean, I think if the federal goes away, the states, then it's their choice, but I do believe most of them would lean to legalize it. Mm-hmm. I think probably the federal law being in place is what's holding these states back.
Well, there's a countrywide, I believe, I think I read this somewhere, that the majority of voters would prefer for it just to be legal everywhere.
Yeah. I would believe that. I haven't read that, but I would believe that for sure. But do you know anyone who's totally against it?
Yeah, I mean, I hang out in some pretty more liberal circles, I guess. So I can't think of any close friends who I know are staunchly against it. I don't know anyone well.
There's a few people that I would say that they would, oh yeah, it should definitely be illegal. That they would totally be against it being legalized. And what's so interesting about it is these people, not only are they old, but
raging alcoholics.
in some cases, yes, but even those that aren't, it's like I'm just can guarantee you've never had it. I don't see why such the strong stance. That would be me, me putting a campaign against cherry pie if I've never had one. What's your problem with it? Let's go to green eggs and ham, right? Maybe you like it. Just try it. Right? So anyway, cons. Um, People do say it's a gateway drug. Is there anything to that, you think?
You know, honestly, to me, that sounds like a piece of leftover rhetoric from the 80s DARE program, War on Drugs campaign. I mean, there's probably some truth to that, but I think in general, there is some percentage of the population that just has an addictive personality and they're going to overdo whatever it is. And there's a smaller percentage of that population of people who are going to start with marijuana and move on to other things. But I don't know that the marijuana is the gateway. I think it's just one of the most accessible illicit substances, and that's why people start there.
I mean, I think what that term refers to, the best I can put it together is if you're smoking marijuana, you're hanging out with people who party. A lot of people who party hard, try a lot of different things, like you said. And if I'm like, hey, I'm starting to smoke weed and I'm hanging out with all these different people that smoke weed a lot, one of them is going to be doing cocaine probably, right? And then so maybe you're exposed, but it's not going to like, oh, I need more because marijuana wasn't enough, so I'm moving on. It's not going to suck you down to another. You might be hanging, if you hang with people who party a lot, including drinking. There's eventually going to be probably marijuana around and other drugs. So I don't know, gateway makes sense. I don't think that's a great con. You know, marijuana, people who like to party, or rather people who like to party like alcohol too, right? And in general, alcohol is not called a gateway drug. People don't say, hey, if you drink a lot of alcohol, you're gonna end up smoking weed, and then you're gonna end up doing cocaine, and then you're gonna end up taking LSD, and then you're gonna end up shooting heroin. People never say that about alcohol because it's not true. There are plenty of people who just alcohol is their thing and they like it, and that's what they do.
That's a great point. Yeah, it makes me think of that phrase, correlation is not causation. Just because a lot of people that use weed end up going, some people use it, end up going on to other things, that it's not because of the weed necessarily.
Yeah, I think it would be more because of the acquaintances and the heavy party people, those party type of addictive personalities, right? The next one I want to speak to specifically, demotivation. People say like someone who uses that, you're going to lose your motivation to get up and do things and be active. And I have an experience with a person that I knew who in college was the most successful student, straight A's, at a very difficult engineering type of degree. I don't know whether it was electrical engineering or whatever. He played on the soccer team. And again, this is in the 80s. So, I don't know where the NCAA was with marijuana urinalysis testing at that time. Had a beautiful girlfriend, overachiever, very friendly, outgoing guy, biggest marijuana dealer on this campus of this small college. So like anytime anyone says that to me, I'm like, no, I knew this guy that was like a superstar, like shooting for, the best internships, everything was going well.
Yeah. No, I know the type, socially graceful, boatload of charisma, I'm sure, smart, and just a people person, and probably a little bit of an entrepreneur too.
I don't buy that you smoke a lot of weed, you'll become demotivated, lose your motivation. I think some people can.
Yeah. That's not the point I thought you were going to make. I thought you were going to tell that guy started smoking weed and then his kind of life unraveled. Yeah. And I was going to say, maybe like the pressure of that overachieving just like finally wore him down. But I would agree with you. I think I mentioned before that when I was younger, I never even tried weed or anything. And I think like part of the reason was because, I grew up in the DARE era. I was told that like, this is your brain on drugs. If you do like, this is what, if you smoke weed, you'll end up just sitting in your parents' basement, all not doing anything with your life. I don't know. I mean, I'm just a kid. That sounds, all these grownups are saying it. That sounds believable. And as I got older, I kind of started like connecting my like personal experiences and people that I knew, and like people who are, like Seth Rogen comes to mind, for example. I mean, the guy's one of the most prolific screenwriters. He's a super successful, Hollywood, makes all these movies. He's a huge advocate for weed. I imagine he smokes weed all the time. Speaking of famous people, Joe Rogan, I'm pretty sure blazes pretty hard. And that's got to be one of the busiest dudes in show business.
Yeah, I heard Joe. Someone told me they listened to his podcast when he smoked weed on there with
Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I said, okay, go for it.
It's just interesting how you get older and you kind of see the world a little bit differently.
Yeah. So I think we're going to call the demotivation debunked, right? That's not a true thing whatsoever. So
yeah, the people sitting in their basements with no job, it's not because of the weed.
Exactly.
Maybe the weed is because there's no job or anything else.
I have a friend from high school, and we both know the same person who we were close in high school. And this person's just, their life has not gone right with jobs, with marriage, with with schooling, education, with housing, with like everything has just not gone right. And
bad breaks or bad decisions or both?
I think bad decisions mainly. And so we get together at a at a group. I think it was like someone was retiring or something, or maybe someone's kid was graduating. So we get together at this like they rented out a room in a restaurant, the back room, and you have a party. And this is off the topic of marijuana, but it makes the same point. He's like, we're like, hey, grab a beer, man. Nice to see you. How's everything going? He's like, oh no, I stopped drinking. And he was all like talked about for 5 minutes about how he stopped drinking and everything's going to be great. And then he walked away to get like a bottle of water.
Shirley Temple.
Or talk to someone else. And my other buddy looks at me and goes, so he really thinks that's alcohol's been the problem the whole time, doesn't he? It's like, it's not the alcohol, it's the person.
Yeah. I could understand that logical fallacy though.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. And I hope people think that, but in certain situations, people are giving themselves that excuse. Back to the cons, just one thing that people bring up is, hey, listen, you're going to have a lot of people driving under the influence, operating heavy equipment that could be dangerous. What do you think about that? Like, is that worth anything to say, well, if we can save even one person who's going to get run over by a guy who's high behind the wheel, maybe we should just keep it against the law?
That argument doesn't hold any water in a society, like you said, where alcohol is legal, where it's available on every corner of every town to anyone with an ID or a fake ID. There's mechanisms in place to try to prevent people from driving under the influence of alcohol. I remember when states first started legalizing weed. I guess this was in the early noughts. And I wondered about that, if we would see an uptick in, car accidents, traffic fatalities. And I actually have read, and I can't give you the sources, but I feel like I've seen where studies they've done, there really hasn't been an uptick. But if the prevalence of cell phones didn't cause car accidents to skyrocket, I don't think legalizing marijuana is going to do it.
Yeah, and I would say when I think about alcohol and marijuana, because we're talking about driving under the influence and saying, is there a difference? I think the difference, based upon what you said and the lack of increased car wrecks, I would argue, based upon extensive experience with both alcohol and marijuana that I've had, I would argue that worse decisions result from alcohol use than those of marijuana use.
That is a great point. That alcohol impairs your judgment to a degree that is so much more severe than someone getting blazed, right?
Yeah, I believe that. 100%. And that's from personal experience, just knowing what it's like to be in the state. Like, there's really, really bad decisions that people, wouldn't even remember even, if they're not even in the capacity to remember things. And I'm not saying you never could, but in general, I have not lost my memory from marijuana. It's probably possible at some level, but I have been in front of a 6-foot long water pipe that had to be carried throughout a college campus in a guitar case because it had to be in 2 pieces. And you can get pretty high from that thing, and I could still remember things. So
this is more bong talk now.
yes, yeah. So, and you could, I mean, it's really like water pipe, really, concentrated. Like
You know what's funny about that? Because you mentioned that before, the using the bong and stuff. The vast majority of my admittedly limited experience has been after it became legal. So therefore, in edible form, you go to the dispensary and you get like some gummies or some chocolates or something.
So there you go. I told you, mine, my subject matter expertise is from the 80s. So driving under the influence already exists. I would think, though, if we need, let me talk this through for a second. We've got a alcohol test that, the breathalyzer that can tell you real quick. We now have a 15-minute COVID test. Can someone not spend a little research and get a quicker test for marijuana? Or is there one? Maybe there is one that a cop could say, blow into this or whatever. And yeah, because everything that you see, if you watch like TV footage of cops and stuff, they're always like, well, I smell a strong smell of marijuana. It's like, you smell it, so what? What does that mean to me, right?
I think that's just something they have to say so that they can search your vehicle.
Sure, but the bottom line is, if we're talking about driving under the influence, right now, as I understand it, without a test that's quick, they're just going to do the same type of test they do a field sobriety test. And I don't know that marijuana and alcohol, it's apples to apples there, but
yeah. Well, that comes back to what we were saying. It doesn't impair you in the same way. Sure. And that's probably what makes the DUI argument not as relevant as it first appears.
Yeah. And I think, if there was a quicker test, someone could, I'm sure someone could be like, yeah, if we put our time and thought into it, and if you really wanted I want to tell right now on the spot if you've smoked marijuana or if you're under the influence of marijuana, I'd love there to be something. But I guess because you say there's so many edibles out there now, probably that's easier said than done. Mm-hmm. without taking a blood sample or something. But moving on, like people, it's federally right now, people who work in national security positions can't smoke marijuana because it's federally illegal, right? Or can't use marijuana. I keep saying smoke because that's my experience, but should that change? People who have security clearances now currently can drink alcohol. I would think that might be a change that needs to come. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we've already kind of aligned on this idea that the federal enforcement needs to go away. It's not adding any value, and it's just making things more complicated than they have to be. There may be other reasons why someone with a security clearance shouldn't be able to smoke weed, but I would leave that up to the individual agencies.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing is, people say right now, if the type of person who would use drugs is the type of person who's got poor judgment, that's sort of the line of thought there. And the type of person who has poor judgment, we probably don't want them in a position protecting national security related information, because
some guy sitting at monitoring NORAD.
Yeah. Who's got poor judgment, right? So probably, but that guy in NORAD can go get slammed at a bar the night before his shift, probably.
Yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
So they probably would have to change that. What do you think about jobs? Right now, there's a lot of jobs like where you have to take a test, drug test, urinalysis, some on a regular basis, right? To get in to be a police officer, to get into the firefighting academy. I know someone who just actually graduated from one of those about 6 months ago. To be an EMT, actively working and driving an ambulance. Pilots, the question should, bus drivers, daycare workers, teachers, because there's people say, well, I wouldn't want the teacher of my kindergartner high, right? Maybe you would, it would make their life easier, right? But, should they be tested? We don't test them for alcohol. We do test pilots for alcohol if they show signs, is my understanding. Mm-hmm. Or like if there was a pilot arrested about a year and a half ago, I remember seeing on the news that he was like visibly wobbling, and one of the TSA guys was like, hey, coming through that checkpoint, like, because they have their own entrances, the pilots and everything.
Yeah, that's a terrifying case.
I guess we have to handle all of these things the same way we do with alcohol. You could become a police officer. They don't hold you back if you drink alcohol, but they hold you back if you smoke weed.
Yeah, I think for these roles, a police officer, firefighter, EMT, those can be physically demanding jobs that, may require running and other, it seems like reasonable to say like generally those people shouldn't be smoking anything, just for their, just for their well-being and their physical capabilities.
To me, and I know in these discussions, we want to find a way forward that makes sense, that has logic and common sense involved in it. My final sort of thoughts on this, being someone who leans a little bit to the right, as you said at the start, and as everyone who's listened before knows, we should legalize it federally. At that point, it would go to the states, let the states decide individually. I think most states would, within a few years, be legalized, and then put the necessary steps in place to regulate, tax, make sure there's all those things in place, to take advantage of that revenue and get all those new jobs going, and have it controlled, and push that criminal danger element, especially at the borders and wherever it's coming into the country, out of it. So we can move on and be civilized, just like people can go into a bar and get a drink of alcohol or beer or a glass of wine. They can go and get marijuana, whether it be edible, smoked, however they want to. More athletic people.
In your case, be a big 2-piece bong and a guitar case.
Yeah. It was called the Kong Bomb. So it wasn't mine, but I was good friends with the guy who dubbed the name. And he didn't play guitar. So, but he had a case. So yeah, I think it makes common sense. I think we should develop a test to test people quicker, like we have for alcohol, if possible.
Certainly, there are situations where it would be, that would be very convenient and very useful.
Yeah, and I don't think that, I agree. As it already is, it's included in the driving and operating machinery under the influence laws that are already there. You shouldn't do it. You already should not fly an airplane or a helicopter under the influence. Those laws are already there. It would just be nice to have a way to test more quickly for marijuana. Mm-hmm. But that could be developed. And we've proven over the past year and a half, or almost 2 years now, that things can be developed quickly if there's the proper motivation behind it. And I think some very smart entrepreneur would come up with something real quick if these local governments and state governments were asking for this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think it's clear that the federal aspect of it is not helping anything and is not doing anyone any good. So that definitely has to go away. Another thing that we kind of got to, and I hadn't really thought of this before we talked, but I think this is really at the crux of it, because I hear the comparisons to alcohol made quite often when this comes up. And I think you're right on the money with when you think about the way alcohol impairs your judgment. I mean, that is a key distinction between these two things.
Yeah. And so someone could turn this argument around and say, well, let's just make alcohol illegal too, like marijuana. And I would say, well, we've tried that. It didn't go very well.
Right.
So I think people by nature, there's vices that people have. And yeah, I don't think marijuana stacks up as a more dangerous or even as dangerous drug as alcohol is, from my experience.
No, it's way less dangerous.
So it doesn't stack up as that dangerous. So people should be able to use it if they want.
Yeah, well, I think huge swaths of the country where that's pretty much the case.
Sure. And I think it will grow. So, but time will tell. And I think we'll see. And I think we will see that come to fruition. So the final question, it's going to be a question for me, right? Because you have, as an adult, used marijuana. You said not sporadically here or there on occasion. So I guess the final question that I was going to ask you, I'm just going to ask myself now: if legalized, would I use it? It's very possible. I will say that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Well, I was going to ask you, like, based on your experiences, because it sounds like you, back in your younger days, had, you knew your way around the Kong Bong. Were those positive experiences, would you say, looking back? You had a good time?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, what I was doing with my life at the time, that was before I went into the military and, sort of changed my direction. I think that you would ask me now, I probably wouldn't use it if legal until I retire.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's how long it'll take for it to become fully legal.
It could be a match made right there in heaven, right? Like it's just meant to be, right? We'll see. Thanks everyone so much for listening. If you have an idea or topic you'd like to hear discussed on the podcast, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this discussion and you'd like to hear more balanced conversations, hit subscribe. Steve and I would really appreciate it.
This is Steve.
And this is Ben.
And we are balanced.